I can pause it for a minute. Thank you for noting.
Recording again.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So we are recording. I'm going to call this meeting of the Middle School Building Committee to order. Good morning, everybody. Glad to see you. So I will see who's here and take roll. Stephen Crane,
I haven't seen Stephen yet.
Jared Stanton,
Good morning.
Matt Johnson,
Present.
Lori Hunter,
Yes.
Justin Cameron,
Good morning.
John Harris,
Here.
Russ Hughes,
Here.
Peter Fishalis.
He mentioned, he shot me an email the other day, said he'd be in Las Vegas and he was 50-50. So if we don't see
Okay.
him, he's away.
Those are good odds. Okay, Alexa Anderson,
Present here.
Court Booth,
Kurt said, yes, you're on mute.
Here. Thank you.
Heather Bell,
Good morning.
Frank Cannon.
I haven't seen Frank yet today.
I don't
No.
see Frank.
He's usually on early too, so no.
Chris Popoff,
Good morning.
Charlie Parker,
Morning.
Matt Root,
Present.
Pat Nelson, I'm present, and Don Grelio.
Present.
Okay, thank you. Before we get started, I just want to, Charlie put in, I think, a good piece of feedback for the committee. Charlie Parker, we met before the holiday and suggested that we take a minute just to frame the meeting in the beginning of the meeting, just sort of what we're hoping to accomplish during the meeting. I know everybody's seen the agenda, but I just want to try to follow through with that. I think that's a great idea, Charlie. Thank you. So we're back again. We are going to try to follow through with what we did last time, which is we'll call on people when they raise their hands. So if you want to speak, you need to raise your hand, and that I think we can be more efficient and effective that way. We're back today to take a look at some of the value management issues that we left open from last time. We know that the warrant article has been published. It's been published at $103.7 million. But we as a committee want to be able to be clear about what we are expecting the costs to be. And that's why we're doing the value management now, to identify areas where there can be some savings and come up with a projected actual cost. SMMA also needs this information in order to continue with their design work. And the information that they're looking for is information on the enhanced ventilation and the soil disposal. So the last time we met, there were some varying opinions about enhanced ventilation. We weren't able to come to a consensus about where we land with that. So what we're expecting today is to get some more information from the SMMA and from Sustainability Committee and anyone else, and hopefully come to a more of a consensus around where we want to go with enhanced ventilation. We also want to have a shared understanding of the value of the soil distribution during the project. So we will hopefully have some more information about the potential for where we can store the soils, and that will also affect the cost of the project. That's, I think, where we are at, aside from the other agenda items that are basic. Does anybody want to add anything to that? Amanda, I see your hand up.
Morning, Pat. I just wanted to say that I am all official now and am part of the committee. So I can add my name to the list and say that I'm here.
Oh, and I am so sorry. I that's completely my oversight. And
No, that's okay.
Well, I saw you in the corner. I thought, well, I've got to remember to welcome Amanda. Amanda, welcome to the committee. We're so happy to have you here in town in your role as Sustainability Director. Is that your title? And a member of our committee. So welcome.
Welcome, Amanda.
And I will mark you as
Yeah, thank
present.
you.
Yeah.
And I know you've already been working hard with some of our communications outreach. So thank you for doing that and providing feedback.
Okay, so we have some minutes to approve. I hope everybody had a chance to take a look at them. So let's start with November 5th. Are there any comments on the November 5th minutes?
Yes,
Uh,
wait.
Heather?
I couldn't get to my hand raising.
Yeah,
Just a quick, this is very minor, but I noticed, I'm trying to pull up which paragraph it is. Up towards the top, it mentions CPAC. And I just wanted to correct that CPAC is, the capital is SEPAC, just because it stands for the special education, as opposed to capital CPAC. So if we can just correct that.
oh, okay, yes, it's right under correspondence.
Under correspondence, yes.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Anything else? So I assume we'll go through all three sets of minutes and then we'll vote on all three together.
Yeah.
Okay. November 12th minutes.
Yes, I have a comment.
Okay, Matt, see your,
So basically it's under approval of minutes. It just said that I moved to approve the minutes, but I wanted to make sure that we said as amended, because right before that, you see that Dawn asked for a change.
okay. All right,
And I believe that's what I said in the motion anyway.
okay. Court?
Yeah, just for this set of minutes and others, I think they all need to be checked for capitalization of various committees, select board, building committee, to distinguish them as real committees. I found in a number of cases, they needed to be checked. Minor point, but because these are archives, let's clean them up.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? Okay, and the November 18th minutes.
Sorry, one other point, Pat. I tried to raise my virtual hand, but
I'm sorry.
I didn't. No, that's okay. One thing that I think we should be really careful of, and I noticed it in the 12th minutes, acronyms. We want to try and spell things out. Like, who knows what an FRP is?
Yeah,
Couple people, but in general, it's a fiber reinforced panel. So we should be clear in our acronyms to do our best, at least. Like common ones, obviously, we like a CMU people kind of know, but an FRP folks may not. So it's probably worth spelling that out formally in the minutes.
Okay, point taken. Okay, November 18th minutes. Any other comments? Okay, do I hear a motion to approve? All three sets?
Motion to approve all three minutes as amended.
Seconded.
Second? Matt? All in favor? I have to call roll again. Stephen Crane?
Yes.
Jared Stanton?
Yes.
Matt Johnson?
Yes,
Roy Hunter?
Yes.
Justin Cameron?
yes.
John Harris?
Yes.
Russ Hughes?
Yes.
Peter Fishalis? Alexa Anderson?
Yep.
Court Booth?
Yes.
Heather Bout?
Yes.
Frank Cannon? Chris Popov?
Yes.
Charlie Parker? Sorry, Charlie. I was reading the paper this morning. Charlie Parker?
Yes.
Matt Wood?
Yes.
Pat Nelson, yes. Don Guerrero?
Yes, the governor's on our committee.
Yes. He's gonna have some time on his hands.
Yeah, that's right. I needed to smile today, Pat. Thank you.
I'm not running again, okay, so.
No political future for you, Charlie.
Not
Okay.
on building committees.
How about correspondence and community update?
Yes, it's pretty quick. Unless anyone else has anything else, I think the only email to the full committee was actually the afternoon of our last meeting. And it was another one, mostly praising us and thanking us for all the hard work, and all of the mentioning the STEM programming, and also asking us not to make any further cuts to the building. The quick communications update is that we have lots of events going on still. Our 8th community forum was last night. So huge thanks to our chairs and Lori and our professionals who were there. We had multiple professionals. Ian was there, and from SMA we had 4. So Lorraine and Matt and Keith and Bill, thanks to all of them for being there last night. We had maybe, I think, taking us out, it was 18 or 19 attendees, some good questions. I'll quickly highlight the questions now, just so we don't bump that to another time. There were questions about how we will continue sports once the fields are not in use, which Lori is going to figure out. Questions about the timeline and plan for the solar panels, which of course were answered. Questions about whether the buildings would be used, the new building would be used in the summer. And the answer is yes, the schools are highly used in the summer, and this one will be much more used than the current ones without air conditioning. And we also asked, sorry, the puppy's making a mess somewhere in the background. We also asked the professionals to just help us give some context around cost for the building, and they helped us do that. There are a couple more coming up that I want to mention. Tomorrow morning, the League of Women Voters is hosting us for their First Friday event. They do a different topic every month, and they've asked us to do a deep dive. Since many of their members have followed this closely, instead of our standard presentation, we're going to go into some of the challenges that we've faced throughout this problem and how we've addressed them. I think that should be a really interesting conversation. Their membership is always very engaged and asks great informed questions. So that should be really good. It is tomorrow morning, 9:30 to 11. It is virtual. And if you want to sign up, go to the League of Women Voters website, and on their calendar, there's a link to register for that, to get the Zoom link. So that should be a great event. Next week, and the official announcement will go out, Alexa, is it today or tomorrow? But we've teased it, is the panel discussion on sustainability. I have to mention a few big thanks here already. Matt Root has been really helpful in helping me to set this up. It's been 2 of us putting it together. Martine Dion is also going to be one of the panelists, and we really appreciate that, her making time in her schedule. And Amanda, although she only officially joined our committee as of today, has already been a huge help here. So kudos there. She took our short list of questions and really helped turn it into a great agenda for that event. So we're really excited for that. That is in person. It's really exciting, over at Peabody, in the Peabody building in the forum. So Wednesday evening, the 8th at 7 o'clock in person at Peabody. Everybody wears masks. And we're really excited to have a panel discussion and really deep dive into the sustainability of the new design, which is very exciting. Then we're going to have lots more coffees, of course, up until our town meeting and vote, just so people can continue to engage however they want. And I think that, Alexa, anything else I'm missing? Are videos going out this week? Videos are going out this week.
Ad is already up and getting many likes. So,
Oh, so check them out.
yeah, they're up.
Make sure you're following our social media, everybody, if you haven't, and make sure you're spreading the word among your friends and neighbors about our events, especially things like First Friday, although it's short notice now, and sustainability panel discussion next week. And that's it. I'll cut myself off now. Oh, Matt.
Yeah, just a point on the communications. Last night we had a incident at the Recreation Commission meeting of just neighbors that were shocked by stuff that was going to happen at Emerson Field. And the interesting thing was, it had gone through the entire Community Preservation Committee process for a year, been voted at town meeting, all this stuff. And yet, the neighbors immediately across the street still had no idea that this was happening. And it just brought to mind that clearly, in this project, there will be a phase in which we will be notifying abutters about work. But at that point, it's going to be underway pretty much. Right. So I just wonder, as part of the forums, we might just go the extra yard here and think about using the similar kind of a abutter notification process one time for a forum that was really devoted to kind of the neighborhood and so I can imagine everything from soils to concerns about the demolition to you name it.
Yeah.
That neighbors would have a special set of interests about. And that this could, help down the road, not having, bigger reactions later on. So just a thought.
Great idea. I love it.
And then the second thing I just wanted to note is, we've of course had these questions about the membership of the committee longer term, and I'm at this stage hoping, to proceed with try to get the select board to amend the charter for this committee to add an additional slot so that we can have a construction person as well as Heather Bout, if you're willing to continue. Now, that said, before I go through that, because it would take, again, a charter amendment plus two different appointments, right? Appointing the new member as well as extending your appointment. I just wanted to put out to the committee that if there are any citizen committee members that were thinking that they did not want to continue, this would be the time, I guess, to make that known to me anyway, so that, in that case, we would just simply substitute, the member. So just let me know if that's the case. If not, we'll just expand the membership. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Matt.
looking into that.
Really appreciate that.
Pat,
And
I
I'll
have a
tell my
question.
family to be prepared.
I have a quick question, Pat. Actually, it's
Yeah.
for Matt, if that's okay, Pat.
Sure.
Matt, would you mind following up via email? Because there are a couple members who aren't present today that it might be helpful just to either you can
Yes,
through us
exactly.
or
Yeah.
to the committee, just as a reminder, in order that we make sure. all
Yeah,
of
I
our
could make
members-
it sort of non-personal. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Any other questions about correspondence or communications? Any comments? Okay, so to the meat of the meeting, and I think I turn this over to you, Ian. Do you start off with our value management?
Yeah, I can get us started here. So this is the VM log that was updated last meeting. This is where we left off. So just wanted to have it available. We were circling back on soil discussions and then the pending item 6B here. So either one I think is fine to tackle first. If anyone has a preference.
Well, why don't we go ahead and start with the soil discussion. If we have some new information, I know that, Lorraine, did you say you all had done some site visits?
Yep, Mike Dowhan, our landscape architect who's on the call, did tour a couple of locations in Concord. I'll let Mike describe where he went and what he saw.
Yeah, so it was virtual. Let me just say that. Yeah, of course, obviously, yeah. So I had a conversation with Elizabeth and Marcia over some potential sites within the community. After some discussion with them, I think we've got it really down to maybe one feasible site at this point, 2229 Main Street, which I'm pretty sure you're all familiar with, the nuclear metals Superfund site. There seems to be an opportunity to store at least some of the fill, or at least maybe get rid of whatever excess fill we have. I think that might be a good opportunity to bring it there. They seem to be more than willing to take it. There were a couple other sites that we talked about, but I think we ended up discounting them for various reasons. There's one other project that sounds like the timing might not align, but I'm waiting to hear back from them at MCI that may be a possibility, but I'm not even considering it right now until we hear more information. The other location, of course, is at Peabody. I had some correspondence with Lori about that. So we'll start developing some sketches to show potential volume storage at Peabody as well.
To be
So I
clear,
think-
the potential storage at Peabody is the temporary. So that
That's
is where
correct.
we could- in if we're
Right.
bringing it back as opposed to disposing.
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you. Yep. And I think that could be either topsoil or suitable fill. I don't, as long as, everything's clean, which we anticipate everything to be clean, I think either one of them can go there. It's just a question of how much volume we can store there.
Michael, did I understand you correctly? The 229 Main Street would be a location for taking soil and leaving it there.
That's correct. I believe that's the case. Yes. That's what we discussed. Apparently they'll take fill. They need fill. They're going to need a lot of fill there. They'll take fill from, they're anywhere, right? So they'll take whatever we can give them. It's just a question of how much space that they can accommodate right now.
Okay.
And I think it's important to just remind the committee that the soil has not been pre-characterized. So the intent of a Superfund site is to put clean fill on top of the site. So, there is some risk in assuming that we can bring more there or bring any there until we pre-characterize soils. So I'm not advocating for assuming more savings at this time than what you've already taken.
What was the prior use of the site before the middle school was built there?
I don't know that, Matt.
Yeah, I'm not sure, Matt.
I can
don't
look
know.
that up. I can look it up. We have a phase one. It's the phase one. I know, I recall after reading the phase one, Matt, that the phase one did not identify any concerns. The issue is so many things that have been used for fertilizers and weed control, etc., over the years can now be determined to be, not suitable. So it's amazing that, when you maintain fields, that you use chemicals to do so, and those chemicals are now, in many cases, biting us back when we want to dispose soils elsewhere.
And there was imported fill brought there. We have at least one test pit that shows that there was imported fill where the ball fields are now, where the building's going to be going. That it looks like there was a hillside there that was filled in to make room for all the ball fields there. So we know that that's imported, is at least imported fill there, non-native material there. So I think that's the other thing that we would just want to make sure that, like Lauren said, once we get the characterization stuff back, we'll know for sure.
Yeah.
But are you saying that we cannot include the potential savings of the soil removal as a result of not having this tested?
I'm saying I would not try and take more savings than you have at this time.
So you're saying there's no upside over what we've already included?
There's a risk to it. There's a risk to it because of the unknowns.
And when will we get through the unknowns?
When we're in DD, when we have to do soil characterization. I mean, that's a long process with testing and we need to know exactly our quantities to do that and locations.
So in your opinion, we're done with this one?
I would not recommend taking more than you have because the risk of the unknown is the concern. But I think, what you have taken, knowing that we have locations, I think, that risk is low. I think taking more is my concern.
Thank you, Lorraine. Court, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I wonder if we could learn a little bit more about what is acceptable at 2229. I've heard this morning that they're looking for anything, and I've heard that they're looking for clean. So I'm curious what actually is the criteria, probably somewhere in between those two statements we got. Secondly, just as a matter of reference, who's the governing authority in town departments or agencies on the decision about what they'll accept over there at this point? Matt, maybe you can speak to that. I don't know.
It's not I think it's the EPA that would be the governing authority.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Massey
still,
did.
yeah, sorry, it's Steven. Sorry, I'm in transit. The EPA still controls the site. They're the licensed site professionals, and so they're the ones that are doing the contouring and shaping. And so, Courtney, to answer your question, there may be soils that aren't clean in the strictest sense of the word that they can use for grade changes and contouring, but for final stuff that's going to be left there, they want clean soils for capping purposes.
Right. Makes sense. Thank you.
So in summary, for this item, we would not have any additional savings that are recommended by by SMMA. And Ian, I assume you concur?
Sorry, you broke up, Pat.
Oh, at this point, we would not have additional savings item based on what SMMA is saying. And I just wanted to check in with Ian to make sure that he concurs with that.
Yeah, I concur with that. I think based on the information that we have to date, that, what we're proposing here for an accepted value, what we talked about before is a good amount of risk to take at this point. We should be able to find a home for all of this, this material here that we're talking about in the accepted values. So.
Mark.
Yeah, just one more. In best case scenario, if things fall our way for additional savings based on today's numbers, what's the ad for VM if things go our way?
Yeah, I mean, I think where this is headed is we're going to continue to try and achieve more savings in these items. And we just need to get into the investigation program. So, something that we weren't able to coordinate during the school year, which is fine. We just need to get into it probably in June when school's out next year. Set up the geotech investigation, have them come back with their findings, and then we can really roll up our sleeves and get into it.
No, I get all of that, but based on these numbers, what are we doing? Pulling the first three rejected values and moving them over to accepted if things go our way?
No.
I think you would take the best case scenario here is that you take the full value of the two that you have that we've accepted at a partial value.
Okay, gotcha. Bump it up to the two original recommendations.
That's right.
Thank you.
Wait a second. These are the you have a column called accepted.
Wait, Charlie, I'm just going to remind you to raise your hand. Thank you.
You have a column called accepted values. Are those the numbers that you're saying that we're going to move into VE? The 230 and the 386?
We're not going to touch those. We're going to maintain those values at this time, and that's part of the total for what we've accepted to date. So maintain those, and then we'll continue to investigate the soils, and if we can achieve more savings, we'll try to do that up to these values in the SMMA recommendation column.
Wait a second. I think what we're trying to get at is what the impact is going to be on borrowing and what we're going to net out as our VE total. I think what I'm hearing is that the 230 and the 386 are the numbers that we're going to, is the max of what we really can include given what we know. Is that correct?
Right.
Now,
That's right.
Beyond whenever we make this decision after town meeting and so forth, I assume this work is going to continue, but that's not really material to the discussion here at this point.
That's what we're being told.
I think you can take additional savings at this time.
We can take additional savings beyond the 230 and the 386 at this time.
No, you cannot.
Okay, good.
No.
Good. So those are the numbers, the 230 and the 386. That's the max of what we can get onto VE.
Yes.
At this time, yeah.
Well, at this, yeah, I mean, that's at this time period. VE ends pretty much. So that's
Yeah.
all we're gonna get. We're not gonna get any more between today and town meeting.
Unless,
No.
I assume that is the recommendation of our professionals. I suppose the committee could say, well, we're willing to take some risk here and add additional savings. But the recommendation of our professionals is not to do that. To just go with the 230 and the 386 that we've already got baked into this. Matt, I'm sorry, Peter, you had your hand up earlier. Peter Martini.
Yeah, just quickly, Lorraine and Ian, without me pulling open the budget, where are we carrying the cost for the pre-characterization? Because that's not done on every job. I'm just curious where we have that.
We have that in the GR environmental budget right now that we've submitted.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Matt?
Yeah, I would just say this is a little different from the other VE items, right? I mean, the other VE items, it really is value engineering. We're just making a design decision not to include something. In this case, we are not making that decision. We are still pursuing the maximum, movement of soil or non-movement of soil, let's say, offsite or disposal of soil. But we're just taking a risk assessment here. In other words, to me, this, all of the elements of the project have risk. You get down the road, you can't deploy this or that, and we can't yield the V, and that's what contingency is about. Here, what is our plan? What is our go forward plan? And then contingency should, and we just up the contingency, should deal with those things that we cannot end up executing our plan. It seems to me, this seems weird to, when we say, especially when I see something that says SMMA recommendation, and then I hear that SMMA isn't recommending it, but the accepted value is more a sense of, again, a contingency than it is on VE itself.
I can address that if you want, Pat.
Thank you, Lori.
Sure. So, there was a lot of work done going through this. I have had numerous projects, Matt, that have had soil export. I've had numerous projects that have had clean soil export and numerous projects that have not clean export. And the dollar values range significantly. One of the concerns, we have is that starting in January, and the reason we went from SMMA recommendation to where we are now, DEP announced last week, starting in January, disposal facilities will now have to have volumes per month, whereas previously a disposal facility could take material for a year. So for example, a facility in Turnkey could say, we can have 50,000 yards of soil during the year. And if our job was exporting 20,000, as the material comes and we deliver it to that site. The DEP is changing the rules starting January 1st for all disposal facilities that they are going to have monthly quotas. So this is something that brand new that came up last week. I'm dealing with soil export on another job. And now we may have to stop exporting soil mid-month because that facility has reached its quota of disposal. So the state is dealing with a lot of soil disposal and landfills, and they're trying to control it. So my risk factor dropped significantly between when we first recommended this and where we are today, because it could significantly impact our schedule and our budget. If the soil contractor is exporting and all of a sudden he can't remove that soil somewhere, he has to spend the other half of the month stockpiling it, waiting for the quota to open again in February. So there's a lot of moving parts with soil. I'm not a civil engineer, and I have become more involved in soil disposal than I ever imagined I would in my entire career. So I just am not comfortable with this, taking on this risk. This is a risk you as the committee can decide to take on, but as your professional, we are not comfortable recommending the risk at this time.
Matt, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I did. I'm just confused by, Lorraine, your comment about the disposal facilities and quotas. I mean, isn't our objective not to dispose of soil, but simply to move it?
It is, but we don't have the data to know that we can do that. You have to pre-characterize your material before it goes off site. We haven't done that. So we're making the assumption that it's clean. 100% clean. But we know that pesticides and herbicides change that value from clean to something less than clean. And different facilities read that differently. So when there was a lot more freedom with disposal facilities before January 1 of this year, I was a little bit less concerned than I am right now, Matt.
Well, I just wanted to note that 2229 Main Street is taking soil as well from 1440 Main Street, right? And they're not having issues with that.
I don't know what 1440 Main Street is.
It's a subdivision project. So they're taking a site that has 2 houses on it now, and they're going to strip a lot of land, soil, and 2229 Main Street is going to take it.
So DEP has something called the MCP, the non-degradation. So you can take soil from one facility as long as you're not making the facility you're moving it to worse. With a Superfund site, you can think that's simple. But with a Superfund site, they also have layers, and the closer they get to their topping layers, they have to get to clean material. So depending upon where they are in the filling process, it would be hard to imagine that the Concord site, our Concord Middle School site, is worse than the Superfund site. But we also are, you know, a year and a half away from export. So I don't know where they're going to be. I don't have that information. I'm not comfortable as your professional saying you should take that risk. If you have more information and you're comfortable, that's the conversation that you should be having as a committee. But by the time the Superfund site gets to the top for the cap, that is part of the plan, is that they have clean material at the top.
I just feel that our budget should reflect our plan, and then the contingency should reflect the risk in the plan.
So if I can ask a clarifying question, Matt, it sounds to me like you're leaning in the direction of we could be less conservative about the probabilities of being able to store or move soil because we have higher contingencies that would mitigate if we're not able to do that. That you're sort of shifting the risk out of this out of the soil removal into the contingency.
Well, basically, I feel like the budget should reflect the plan. The contingency should reflect the risk. I think that that's what those 2 line items are supposed to represent. And so when we build contingency into a budget line item, we're just doubling down on basically silently on contingency. And I think that we end up with a budget that doesn't reflect our plan.
I see your hand up.
Yeah, when I look at this spreadsheet, my interpretation is somewhat similar to Matt Johnson's, and that is that the question before us is, are we prepared to remove the additional or transfer the additional 417,000 in recommendation? I think that's the delta from estimated cost over to through VM into a contingency. It's going to impact the current contingency to move it over and reduce the estimated cost correspondingly. I think that delta is 417.
And would
Hey, I got my hand up.
wait, Charlie, because I'm chair and I get to do this. I just want to clarify. Does that change the contingency number? I mean,
No, it changes
contingencies.
It doesn't. I'm not saying we would increase the contingency number. I'm simply saying it becomes an additional unknown, not accounted for in construction price estimate to bring forward to town meeting, where we remove it.
So we could take that cost out of the estimated construction price and assume that if we're wrong, the contingency will cover it.
That's what I'm saying. That would be the implication, I believe. Yes.
Yeah, that's how it's set up now. So if worst case scenario, we have to export all of this material and the $230,000 and $386,000, the way that we would pay for that is through the use of contingency. So we think that this plan here of exporting a portion of material and maintaining a portion of material is achievable as proposed in these values. Otherwise, if the plan doesn't work, then that's the risk that's taken, and you would pay for it through the use of contingency.
And if the plan does work, the contingency can be used for other items that we're not expecting to escalate, or for other items.
Yeah, it's only available once.
Yeah, it's only available once. Heather, and then Chris.
Thanks. I think this is an interesting debate, but I'm getting uncomfortable with the idea of accepting all of this and putting it into contingency because of the fact that the contingency is built based on certain risk factors already. This is now a significant one. If we add this in, it decreases our ability to roll with other issues or problems that come up for which the contingency was planned. So I don't think I'm comfortable with assuming that we're going to make this happen or putting a huge extra risk into contingency. I feel like with this, and I understand that the town is asking us to get as close to 100 million as possible, but I also think that beneath that request is a more important one of then stick to your numbers. And if we do this and then we come back and we need more, that's going to be a much bigger problem than addressing the risk conservatively now. So that's where I stand.
Thank you, Heather. Chris.
So the way I understand this, right now, 103.7 million includes the worst case scenario, which would be, as Lorraine has pointed out, all of the soils we've identified in the VM log get exported, right? So all we're really saying for folks is, right now, to be conservative, we have a potential of taking a few $100,000 off of that because we're reasonably comfortable some of the soils can stay put. But we're not going to go beyond that right now until we know more about what nuclear metals can accept, et cetera, et cetera. So we're back to where we were last week of saying, yeah, conservatively, we've got a few $100,000 we can take out of the 103.7, but there's still the possibility all the soils have to leave the town. Am I oversimplifying things, or do I think I have that about right?
I mean, that's accurate. In the 103, I thought it was 107, but in 103.7, you've included that 600,000 as a potential risk. That's in there right now. And I don't think it's oversimplifying to say more. I mean, there is risk associated with even that 600. So it's how much more risk you're willing to take at this time. I will say that the goal would be that we get this material tested so we know early it'll probably be closer to the end of DD by the time we get it done, but so that we know where we are before we start into contract documents. So before we go to bid, we know, but we don't know now.
Matt, I see your hand up again.
Yeah, I just was thinking that even the original line item is saying that we're assuming we'll only be able to move 50% of this. So now we're saying we're only going to be able to move 25% of this. So I thought that the original line item that was saying that 50% was already hedging about our ability to actually do this. And, we're hedging our hedge is what I keep coming back to. So, if it's the will of the committee, that is it. But I just wonder if we're kind of just talking ourselves into a number rather than working through what our plan is and those associated risks. So I don't know. I'm also a little frustrated that we've been working on this VE list now for a month or so or more. And just to hear today that oh, well, because we can't know about the soil condition, we can't really decide on this. I don't know why we spent all the time up until now on this.
I think I would like to respond to that, Matt. I think that we are wrestling with this because it was a big number and and there's an unknown. So it introduces a risk factor. I think as a committee, we are charged with getting the best information we can get at any given time, assessing risk and making decisions. And that's why this has taken so long. Yeah, this has been, it's annoying to keep thinking about where are we going to put dirt, but it was a big number, and we are trying to address the total cost of the budget. I'll just say that I agree with Heather that I'm not comfortable with having some data or some information that introduces the level of risk with increasing the savings from the dirt, and then shifting that risk into contingency. I would rather start conservatively, and then, by golly, if at the end of the day we're able to move all of that dirt, the project costs less at the end of the day. That's my opinion. And now we're going to need to come up with some recommendation. I believe, Lorraine, you need to know what we want to do with this item, or can we let it float, and tell me what we need to do here.
But you've already accepted, some value. It's not going to change what we do right now, because we're not going to start the testing until DD. So really what you change now is the discussion of your risk. It's not going to change our data. It's not going to change our schematic design right now. It's only changing the bottom line without data. So.
Okay.
Yeah, just to speak.
Go ahead, Ian.
I thought that we were clear up front that we didn't have all of the information available for make definitive decisions on where the soil would go. We communicated that there was limited information. There was essentially 3 borings and a handful of test pits that were done, I think 2019 or 2020 timeframe. And we're basing all of our decisions off of that limited information. And I thought we were clear on that from the start of these discussions, and that we had to do more investigation. This upcoming geotech program, I want to say, has in the tune of 20 plus borings, and how many test pits, like 10 test pits or something like that. So it's a lot more extensive in gathering information and understanding different locations throughout the site, instead of having limited information at very specific areas. They focused initially on the building footprint when they did the investigation. So I think ultimately what you're doing here is you're either carrying this cost in the construction value, or you're carrying it in contingency, because any savings realized in this VM log gets rolled up into contingency. So it's just a matter of where you're carrying the risk. You're either carrying it in construction, or you're carrying it in contingency.
But what it does do is if we carry it in the construction contingency, and not in the construction contingency, in the value management, we'll get to a bottom line that either gives us more or less room as we consider enhanced ventilation. Any other changes we want to make in the project. Am I correct in that? That's really, if SMMA doesn't need this information in order to finish design development, really what the committee is struggling with is, how do we understand what our bottom line is? And then how does that impact the other question we have, which is a sustainability question?
So maybe I can clarify my answer. We don't, we don't have the data to make the difference in schematic design on where the soil goes. So if we're making a global statement saying the soil is going to go off, we're going to take that risk. Our schematic design report is going to reference that the building committee, that the project is going to make the assumption that this material can go off. It doesn't change our product. It doesn't change our schematic design product other than some narrative. What it does do is it changes the bottom line, because you're either accepting that credit value or not. In design development, we will do the testing that will give us that information. So in design development, if we test and the material is clean, can go anywhere, and we know exactly how much and we know where it can go, that savings will come to the bottom line in design development. But it will, do you know what I mean? Like I can't guarantee it now. I can't guarantee that at schematic design.
Okay, Matt.
Yeah, just to clarify, I thought over the last two meetings that we were withholding making a final determination on this depended upon finding other sites for the soil. And then here today, I hear pretty much good news about that. But this is the first time, as far as I can recall, that we hear that soil condition is a condition of whether we can achieve this VE item. And so therefore it kind of trumps even finding a site. So all that time spending trying to find other sites, I guess it was necessary, but not sufficient. To me, that's why I'm frustrated with the process. Seems like if we already had that other constraint, that could have really affected the whole pursuit of these VE items. So that's the source of my kind of discontinuance here.
Thank you, Matt, and I appreciate that. What I want to do is try to move forward today.
I have a question.
Court had his hand up first, and then
I had my hand up a while ago as well, so.
I'll yield to Charlie.
Court yields.
No, I gotta, well, what do you want to do?
I'll yield to Charlie.
So have we, if the soils are retained on site in one fashion or another, we don't have the problem of transporting it elsewhere. Now, have we definitively maxed out all opportunities for on-site storage in this analysis? Have we determined the volumes, and have we sorted out those footprints of where those soils can go? And have we taken every last shot at this?
We have done an analysis of the existing site and where we can put material. Have you maxed it out? Have you definitively maxed that out? I will say we have beyond maxed it out. We've taken parking away from the schools to get maximum. We've taken away some of the play areas. So we are expecting that that's not going to be a full decision, and it'll be somewhat less than that. But in order to max it out, we have to take parking and we have to take some play areas.
Thank you.
Just a comment, Pat, if I may. No news to anybody at the meeting that I think and talk about risk at every meeting and contingency. For me personally, I put this additional possible cost reduction, i.e. accepting additional VM on this one into the risk category and call it rather small relative to all the other risks that we've got involved in this project already. I think we've got a great deal of risk already baked in. So another $400,000 saving, I don't think is going to upset the project any more than what we've got in there right now. Thank you.
So moving forward on this item, we could take, so I'm not quite sure how we move forward on this item. Let me start there. And if anyone has any suggestions, especially those who've been through this process before, I'd be happy to hear them.
I'd like to know what number we would be accepting or rejecting. I did a little arithmetic and came up with 417. Was I correct? I can't really see the spreadsheet too clearly here.
It's 6 something. 617,
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, clearly. I didn't see
617,
it.
212.
Thank you.
That's, okay,
Alexa has her hand up, Pat.
I'm sorry, Alexa is looking at the spreadsheet.
I just wanted a quick clarification. Would the 617 be over and above what we have already approved, or the new sum total of what we would approve?
This is what was already accepted.
Okay, so that's what is already accepted. So then
And if you take the rest, it's another 617 over what you've
okay.
already approved.
So we are voting on the over and above.
Risk, that's adding the 617.
Another 617. Got it.
17.
Okay, thank you.
Another 617 above the 230 and 386.
Yeah,
Yeah, so to be clear, what you did at the last meeting was you took half of the recommended value, half of the value in column M. And what I think people are asking is, do we take the remaining, 50% of that right now, which would add another 617 of a credit to the VM log. So you've already taken 617. Do you take the other 617 for the full value?
right. Which saves $617,000, another $617,000 off of the 1 point, whatever it is now,
1027.
1027. We take it out now. Then once we get finished with today's discussion on the enhanced ventilation, we will have a new bottom line number that we can take to town meeting with us and say, this is what we think this project's going to cost based on our value management. Matt.
I just wanted to note that it would have more than a $617,000 impact on the entire budget, right? Because we're looking at construction cost here.
This isn't really going to change a lot of the other costs, Matt. It doesn't change all the specialty consultants. It doesn't change FF&E. Everybody always thinks it's a 1-for-1. It's not always a 1-for-1.
It's just the way that the spreadsheet is built, that these numbers are coming in at a point before various multipliers take effect.
Nope. These have all the construction markups all on top of it.
But the
These
project
numbers are
markups
inclusive
are
of
above
markup.
that. The
Yes, but the project,
contingencies, et cetera, are built off of this.
correct.
So
So
I'm
it
just
is
saying
like
that the net would be probably over 700,000. Just saying.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please do.
So I was not able to be at the last meeting. So the bidding contingency was voted as bidding only. Would the committee be open to making that bidding contingency also include this risk? So it's not just a bidding, but it includes the soils if the soils do come back and need to be disposed of because of their categorization?
I've been under the impression that the bid would include this process, but you're saying that that construction bid does not include this process?
So let me get my words right. No, I'm sorry. Forget what I just said. It doesn't matter. It's the same thing.
So this is what I was saying. We now have this extra bid contingency. And so if the bid comes in higher because they feel like they can't move all that soil, that's part of what the contingency is supposed to cover, I guess. That was the intent anyway that I had when I proposed it.
Yeah,
I was mainly thinking about inflation and escalation, but there's any number of contingencies that would that could affect the bid.
Okay, I think we could just keep debating this, but it seems to me we're either going to put this extra cost in the contingency or we're going to put the extra cost in this is what we think the project's going to cost based on the information we have at hand. Don, help me out here.
I think Ian's thinking what I'm thinking, which is overall amount of contingency. Is it close to $7 million?
Yes.
Am I doing the math correct? Yeah, that is a lot of contingency.
It's a lot of contingency. And so essentially what you're going to do here, if you accept a greater value, this number is going to go down and your contingency is going to go up. So you're just moving money from construction to contingency by accepting more of the value.
That's kind of where I was headed. Thank you, Ian.
Yeah.
Why does the contingency go up, Ian? Befuddling my math brain. So
the contingency wouldn't go up unless we explicitly moved that additional money to contingency.
Okay.
If instead we just say, hey, we just added a 2.5% bidding contingency last meeting, and so we can have a little bit more appetite for risk, and we could have our budget reflect what we intend to do, then, if it doesn't work out, we have $7 million of contingency to help us.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's helpful. Matt.
Well, and just I'm looking for confirmation of what Matt Johnson said earlier, that we're still just talking about 50% of the soil. I mean, there is still money in there to move at least some amount of it to a disposal place, right?
That's correct.
I don't know. It just since I've got the floor, it seems like we could accept more of this what's on the value management log right now.
Don?
Yeah, just one last point. I just want to share that in my professional experience, every single site has soil problems. I've yet to, in my career, ever have a project that does not have unsuitable soils that need to be taken off site. So just sharing context that doesn't really have a lot to do with the decision, but just sharing that in my experience and, multiple dozens of projects in Massachusetts, they're typically the worst sites in town. I've found cars, abandoned landfills, oil tanks, you name it. It's common in school sites. So just sharing.
How often was it over 50%?
Over 50% of the amount of soil we're trying to move.
That's right, because that's what, if we accept the so-called full amount, we're assuming we can only move 50%.
It varies, Matt. I've had a project where more than 50% of what we were excavating had to be taken off. And a lot of it had to do with the oil and gasoline. But I've also, in my most recent project, which has a septic system, have found multiple abandoned leaching fields the size of football fields. So just something else to consider as we're talking about like soils and what's affecting them underground. With only 3 borings, there's not a lot of definitive data. So, I don't have an answer. I'm just sharing context.
Yeah, just very quickly for our professionals, a note that the town right now is removing upwards of 30,000 cubic feet of soil from Warner's Pond. That's the site of a pail factory, lots of toxics. And so that might be quite instructive as to how the town's managing that one at this very moment.
Lori? I see hand up.
Thanks, Pat. I just want to be sure everyone here knows the story of the high school project. There was a landfill discovered right at the Walden Street entrance. The project couldn't afford the remediation, so it took 2 tries at town meeting to get the $1.5 million passed to clean it up. Very fortunate that it was located where it was because it didn't impede the project. And then we didn't actually get that site remediated until I would say spring of 2018 in a building that opened in 2015. So we have local history of an issue like this. I just be sure everybody knows that story.
So am I correct in assuming, all right, just to summarize, we have $7 million in contingency. We have a potential adding or removing $617,000 from the bottom line of the total cost of the project as we speak of it today. The question is, how comfortable is the committee taking that additional $617,000 out of the project budget and assuming contingency will cover it if we're wrong, versus leaving it in and using that bottom line as our metric as we continue to consider other changes in the design?
You want comments on that?
Well, Heather, do you want to make a comment on that?
Yeah, I'm in favor of the latter. I think the latter is the direction we should take. I think that the budgeting framework that we have right now is the right one, and that we should continue to use it. I don't think we should take things out and stick them somewhere else in some other box. I think that the contingencies work in the way Matt presented it, and I think that's the way we ought to go here. It's just more risk in the number.
Heather?
I have to say still, especially, I'm going to reiterate what Lori said about having to deal with the landfill. The school committee went through years of turmoil trying to deal with that afterwards. I know that we're trying to get to a lower number now, but we're not debating here how much we're going to spend. I feel much more comfortable keeping it in our number and then taking it out if and when we realize that we can do that, even if that's after we've gone to town meeting. Nobody's going to be disappointed if we spend less than we are allowed to. And I feel like that's important that we give ourselves the ability to do that responsibly.
That's consistent with my comment.
So are we ready for a motion? Does anybody want to make a motion on this? Heather, your hand is still up. Oh, now.
Sure, I'll make them. I meant to take it down, but I'm happy to make a motion. I would move that we leave the soil plan as is and not take out any more money from the value management list. Not accept anymore, sorry.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Dawn. Discussion? Okay, hearing no discussion. Is, Stephen, your box list, do you have something you want to say or no? Okay.
Just to take my spot.
Yeah, just looking for, whatever light we want to shed on this. Matt?
Sorry, quickly, I'm interested, we're taking this vote before the next discussion, which also has a big cost line item. And I think that the two are somewhat interrelated because it is all about costs.
They are, I agree, Matt, that they are very interrelated. I just don't know how we get to understanding what it is that we're working with as we're making our decisions.
And I totally agree. I guess I think we'll be more hesitant to add cost about increasing ventilation because we have not, if we do not take up this additional $600,000 savings. I'm just observing. I'm not.
Yeah, no, that's a good observation. And again, it boils down to where we put this cost. If I think we have to take these decisions somewhat independent as a committee and being responsible. So
Can I ask a question? Is someone recommending that we take a number larger than the accepted value that's shown on the screen? Is anybody recommending that?
yes,
Who?
I believe that that's what Matt and Court have been discussing.
Well,
That
can we hear from Matt Johnson on what a number might be? Can we get your comment on that? I certainly don't disagree with that. I just think we ought to continue with the budget structure that we have. Now, if we want to go for more than the 230 and the 386, how much? And again, it should stay at this level.
So what I understand, and Matt or Court, you can correct me, the alternative view is that we put in the 617,000, that would be the total amount for soils, and allow the risk to be absorbed by the contingency. So we would be adding an additional reduction of 617,000. Am I correct?
I can't speak for Matt. I believe that's a responsible risk to accept the additional 617 from the original recommendation, representing the 50% number. Yes.
Right, but so in the items that are in column N, I would have proposed we keep in column O. But rather than cutting them yet again in half, I mean, again, we're going from 50% to a 25% assumption is what we're now going to do.
So you're recommending 460 plus 773, not column O.
That's right. I'm recommending using the numbers from column N, not column O, but that's not the motion that's in front of us right now.
Right. The motion in front of us is to maintain the, Ian, did you just change something? Yeah, to maintain the savings of 230,000 and 386,000.
Yeah, sorry, I changed it to what Matt was suggesting, just to show people. But it's back to the original proposal, consistent with the motion.
And if this passes, that's what we will do. If this fails, someone else can put forward another motion.
Pat, will you call the motion, please?
Yes, I call the question. Is that what I'm doing? Calling the question?
Yep.
So, Heather, Ian, can you restate the motion since you guys are going to be putting this in the minutes so I can make sure that we've got this?
Pat, I think it's technically moving the motion.
Okay, moving the motion. So, Ian, can you restate it?
Yeah, so the motion is to maintain the accepted values in column O.
So effectively, it's a take no action vote, Ian.
That's
Exactly.
Thank you.
All right. So it's a take no action vote. Okay, so I'm going to, let's see, I haven't done this before. Is this a yay or nay or all in favor or?
The yay, it's a roll call.
By roll call.
By roll call, a yay or nay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, Stephen Crane,
Yes.
Jared Stanton,
Yes.
Matt Johnson,
No.
Lori Hunter,
Yes.
Justin Cameron,
Yes.
John Harris,
Yes.
Russ Hughes,
Yes.
Peter Fishalis, Alexa Anderson,
Yes.
Clerk Booth,
No.
Heather Bout,
Yes.
Frank Cannon, Chris Popov,
Yes.
Charlie Parker,
No.
Matt Root,
No.
Pat Nelson, yes. Don Grelio?
Yes.
Okay. So we have 1, 2, 3.
Pat,
Please call.
Pat,
on
don't forget
Amanda.
Amanda.
You forgot Amanda.
Amanda, I'm sorry, Amanda. I'm sorry. I'm looking at my list. I'm going to write you in right now. Amanda.
I'm a yes, but for the meeting minutes, I also didn't vote, but I was happy to abstain on that one since I wasn't part of the committee on those.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. It looks like this passes. And we can move on. All right. Oh, I thought that was going to be easy or easier. But now let's move into the discussion on ventilation. Lorraine, I think you had some data to present on this that folks had asked for.
Yep, and Andy Olderman, our mechanical engineer, is with us. So we were asked to compare the basis of design with the enhanced ventilation and the data we've received from Willard. So Andy put it into this sort of straightforward chart just so we could look at it and discuss it. And Andy, I don't know if there's anything additional you wanted to add.
No, just to comment that the air change per hour reference is specific to ventilation as opposed to the total air circulation that would happen in the space, which, you know, for us is typically a more relevant perspective when we're talking about air changes per hour.
So Andy, sorry, can you just explain, or I'll raise my hand back. Can you just explain that more, what you just said, Andy? What is the difference? And so therefore, what are we looking at versus what you just referenced?
Sure. So there's kind of two components to the air distribution in a typical classroom for the project. One is ventilation air. And so that's provided by dedicated rooftop energy recovery units that are filtering and conditioning that air and distributing it directly to the classrooms. And that airflow is what's represented in this chart. There's also going to be our heating and cooling system, which is a VRF, variable refrigerant flow, refrigerant-based system. And so each classroom will have its own fan coil unit, and that fan coil unit will be responsible for maintaining temperature set point in each classroom. And those units provide additional airflow to what's being provided through ventilation. And so when I think about air changes per hour, it's more relevant to temperature control than it is to say ventilation. I think I think we have we're talking about ventilation in terms of CFM per person, total CFM to the room, to a classroom, a typical classroom. And we're talking about in terms of the CO2 parts per million that we can hope to maintain in the room based on those levels, given the occupancy in the classrooms. So ventilation as distinct, sorry.
Just to clarify, the scope of the difference, when you're saying you think of air changes per hour as more related to the heating and cooling, what is the difference there? You were looking at a scope here of 3 or 4 or 7. What are the numbers when you're looking at heating and cooling? Oh, at range, similar numbers, or are you talking in the 10s or something?
No. Typically, it's in the range of 4 to 6 air changes.
Okay.
And sometimes that number is inclusive of ventilation.
Oh, okay. Got it. Thank you. That's helpful.
Sure.
And I'm assuming that the calculated space CO2, the lower the number is, the better the number is. I have to think this pretty simplistically.
Right. And, so the sustainable subcommittee was looking to target 800 parts per million in the classrooms. And so that's one of the measures that we were looking at for the enhanced ventilation approach.
This is Charlie. I'd just like to ask a quick question on.
Charlie, wait a minute. Matt had his hand up earlier. I'm sorry, and I didn't call it. So, Matt.
Well, no, I'll yield to Charlie.
So I just had a question about what's in that CFM per person column. you indicated on the July whatever 31st presentation that the OA per person, outdoor air per person, was 13. What is that number 19 represent? Does that recirculated air plus outdoor air, or is that now 19 outdoor air CFM per person?
It's outdoor air. So I'll plead guilty to speaking off the cuff at that July 31st meeting without my spreadsheet in front of me. So I would not reference that number.
So you have made a change. You have increased the capacity since that July 31st meeting.
Well, when
that's great. It's great.
Yep. No, as we went through schematic design, we were continuing to kind of look at these numbers, and we did a more rigorous calculation specific to identifying ventilation. With the idea of predicting what the CO2 level would be in the classroom, because that became such a focus of our discussion. And so it's useful. I just want to point out one thing in that 19 CFM per number, which is represented in the base bid for this project. So the raw number that you come up with is 15 CFM per person, roughly. That number gets, when you take into consideration there's a consideration of ventilation effectiveness that happens in these calculations, which is to say, if you're delivering air from overhead and also returning it, from overhead, and you're delivering that air at a temperature that's, more than 15 degrees different from the room set point, you have a different ventilation effectiveness. And that's what we incorporated into this. And so when you consider that, it turns that number from 15 into 19, which is why we carried that 19 number in our base design. I would say that since we have the VRF doing the work for temperature control in the space, we have the latitude to supply that ventilation air at room set point or close to it, and therefore don't have to take that ventilation effectiveness penalty, which means that in order to achieve the code requirement, it would be 15 CFM per person. But we have, by controlling it this different way, you end up with effectively enhanced ventilation just with what we're carrying in the project. So the difference there might be if we were predicting a CO2 level of 970 parts per million in that base design with that ventilation effectiveness penalty. When you remove the ventilation effectiveness penalty, it drops it a little bit to say, I think around the 940 level. Sorry, getting a little too deep into it here.
No, that was helpful, Andy. Matt?
The other thing the other point that I made earlier in our discussions as we're going through cost estimating is, unfortunately, when you look at ad alternates, there's a process of really, taking a deeper dive into those costs than they're typically taking on the root project itself. Because, on the root project, even though they're providing some line item costs for equipment such as DOAS units and air handling units and ductwork, et cetera, their indicator is sort of a cost per square foot number. That's their compass, and so that's what helps them say, well, I think I'm taking a little bit too much here, and so I'm going to pull back, because I think the real number is, whatever, $50 a square foot, $55 a square foot. So when you consider the ad alternates, they are specifically diving into the cost deltas associated with that. I think as we go into DD and then CD level, as the cost estimates, move along in design, that delta, begins to disappear. It gets kind of absorbed into the project. The other point I was making is that our intent in design development is to, right now we have 3 DOAS units that are providing ventilation to the majority of the spaces, with the exception of the cafeteria and the gymnasium and the auditorium, which are served by separate air handling units and get their ventilation from those units. Generally on projects, we try to link together those DOAS units through like headered ductwork, because the kids are not always in every room at every time. And so there's some inherent diversity. And by headering the ductwork together, you get the ability to direct some of the air from one DOAS unit over to the spaces that are otherwise served by those two DOAS units in the classrooms. And in the base design, I didn't include that that design effort just because, you know, there's this pinch point at that narrow entryway that happens that separates the classroom wings from the common area wing. And but I've talked to architecture, and our intent is try to provide some sort of a headered duct connection there that would allow us to move air from one part of the system to another part of the system. And the ductwork generally is sized pretty conservatively as we get our recommendations from our acoustic consultant, you know, to maintain sound levels. So there's a lot of give in that ductwork sizing to be able to accommodate that kind of operation. I'll stop talking.
Matt, can I just ask a question before I go to you? So that ductwork changing that you just described isn't part of the calculated space CO2 for the basis of design, or it is?
It's not. So that, you know, the top line, the 19 CFM per person, that's what's in the base design number. What's in the value management log for upgrading is that second line down, 25 CFM per person. But that approach in that second line doesn't have to do with this header ductwork notion that I just shared with you. That has to do with, hey, we're going to increase the size of the DOAS units and the related ductwork and systems, you know, down from there to be able to achieve that that goal. What I'm suggesting is there's a way to accomplish a good chunk of that by simply, you know, providing this header ductwork. And
so that those numbers could change, the 19, the 3, and the 970.
Yeah, I guess what I'm, not to confuse the committee, but I guess what I'm suggesting is that with that relatively simple feature, you know, 19 CFM could start to approach 25 CFM without necessarily investing in larger DOAS units.
Okay, that was my question.
Right, at a lower cost, Andy, than
right.
The current VM log would suggest.
Correct.
I'm sorry, everyone. I have to jump off at a 9 o'clock meeting, and I know that this is inopportune for me to be leaving. Andy, I really appreciate all of those comments, and I think, you know, the discussion on the 19 shows the complexity of the issue. I also really value your comments on looking at this individual line item as a cost in the value management log, and just the challenges of that. I mean, I guess if I could pull us out for a minute, and maybe I'll be back in an hour and you'll still be here talking. But I guess I can't. I think that ventilation is incredibly important in our school buildings, and I'll stress that the Ashrae standard is the minimum ventilation guideline. It says minimum in how it's explained as a guideline. So that means legally that's the worst that we could build. And I just think that for this school project, we want better ventilation than the legally worst we can do. And so I know that we have a big number in front of us in terms of the value management log. I think that there are solutions, as Andy has just highlighted, with headering ductwork or other alternatives that we could take, so that the enhancement does not carry such a large price tag. I mean, that really is the issue, that it's a big cost item right now as we're looking at it. And I would love to see our committee provide guidance to the design team to figure out some ways to increase airflow to these spaces, and that can be through maybe more targeted spaces, looking at just classrooms or just specific areas. I think there's a lot of opportunity, but just the way the design process works, the design team hasn't gotten there yet, and that's normal. I mean, more of that work happens in design development. But I think it's important, or I would strongly advocate that we provide guidance to the design team to figure out solutions so that we can increase airflow, not at necessarily the cost line that we're carrying right now. But I don't want to see us doing a minimum pathway. So with that, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to jump off, but good luck.
Thank you, Matt. Heather.
Thanks. So I want to explore this a bit because I've been having trouble with the overall cost of this. Are we now looking at, between what Andy and Matt said, the idea of being able to improve it, but not at the line item cost that we're looking at? Is there an in-between number that we should be considering?
It's hard for me to say that, there's a certain number that represents, those sort of alternate pathways that I was just discussing. In part, I think that, DD, the next issuance that we'll have in this project is, where we are, more detailed drawings. We have equipment located on plans. We're showing main duct runs, and we're showing typical distribution to classrooms, et cetera. I would be surprised if this, header duct that I'm referring to gets, makes, much of a dent in any sort of cost estimate. I think it's just going to be seen as, typical distribution. It's not a major cost element in the project. Just to comment on that one approach. I don't. So, for example, if we said, okay, geez, I think we should carry another 100,000 instead of the listed number in the VM log. I don't even think that's necessary. I think that approach just gets absorbed into the budget. I don't think it moves the needle. The things that would move the needle is if we are saying, okay, our 3 DOAS units, which are currently 15,000 CFM each, we want to make those 20,000 CFM each. That's going to get noticed, and that'll have an impact on the bottom line.
And to do that, that's the number that we're already looking at, it's not in front of us, 720 or so.
Right. And so the cost estimators, when they were looking at that enhanced ventilation option that's in the VM log, they were looking at taking 3 DOAS units from 15,000 CFM each to 22,000 CFM each.
Okay.
And then they also then project that into estimating a tonnage of ductwork and other equipment impacts. And so those are the bigger pieces that make up that number.
Okay.
Sorry, I wanted to clarify one thing. Matt mentioned Ashrae, and so Ashrae is not shown on this chart. It's, I believe, somewhere up here. So it's not the basis of design, correct?
Well, no, it's essentially it is, Ian. It just it's the it's kind of what I was talking about earlier with this ventilation effectiveness notion. If you do the code, if you do a code analysis, it comes out to about 15 CFM per person. But then when you adjust for ventilation effectiveness, which is the manner in which that ventilation air is distributed to the classrooms, then that 15 number becomes 19 in order to meet Ashrae. And so, but what I was saying was, we can it's not difficult for us to operate the system and not have to incur that ventilation effectiveness penalty, which means that Ashrae code would effectively be 15. And by carrying 19 in the project, we would have some, effective enhancement already. But so I'm not, you're ultimately right in the point that I'm making, but our approach for listing it in the first line item was following code. Sorry if that's confusing.
Pat?
Yes, Charlie.
So I just wanted to explain the thinking, some of the thinking behind the middle tier, the 800 ppm. We did a simple calculation to determine what the CFM would be required to get to 800 ppm, and that's the number we came up with. No more, no less than that amount of thinking. We used the basic formulas. Now 800 ppm also is the number that's recommended by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for public buildings. It's also the number recommended by the EPA for office buildings. Now, offices are different than schools. I understand that, but some schools do pursue 800 ppm, and some of them are right next to Concord. Lexington does, Acton's new school does, and the recent construction in Cambridge does. I'm not talking about Tobin because I don't think they've finished their plan, but 800 ppm is not something that sort of is out of the realm of sort of what's going on. So getting back to Matt's comment about not going with the sort of the base level, I just wanted to make some comments about 25 CFM per person and the 800 ppm number. Now, you don't need to pursue a full 25 CFM per person, and you don't need to pursue full 800. But in terms of increasing, ducting sizes and air handlers, you could do something in between as a different measure. Now, I will note that Willard, someone decided that Willard, wanted a significantly better ppm. We certainly wouldn't recommend that, but were they wrong? Did they make a mistake? I don't know. It's interesting that 550 is the number at Willard, and 47 CFM per person is the outdoor air complement that they're achieving. So there are a variety of ways of going at this, and I guess net. I mean, if we're going to do this, I don't think we should add to the budget. I think we should look for the money elsewhere, in our design, and look for it now and not increase the bottom line. But I don't think that we should rule out increasing the size of the air handlers or increasing the size of the ducting. I'm uncomfortable with that.
One of the data points that we discussed at our last meeting was, yes, the Willard Building Committee came out with 47 CFM per person. And now we have some possible history of how effective that was. And I didn't know, Lori, if you had some information to share about that history.
Yes, we had been asked quite a while ago by the sustainability subcommittee to see what we could find for data. So I have that. I just need whomever's screen sharing to stop sharing, and then I can pull it up. I'm not sure whose slides those are.
I think it's Ian.
Is that Ian?
There we go.
Thanks,
I got
it. So this is the data we pulled from our system. It's high level for sure, because it's hard to do it any other way. We had been asked to look at Willard pre-new building and post-new building. So that's there with 2008, 9, and then 9, 10. And then the post at 1819, and then we stuck with 1819 to pull Alcott and Thoreau. What the best we could do was pull total number of days absent for the year for the entire school population, take the total enrollment that year and divide it to come up with an average number of days absent per child for the year, just to find a way to compare and make sure we had apples to apples. So you can see the data there. I think there's a lot. I've been looking at this for a little bit now, the last few days, wondering how you interpret it, because I think there's room for interpretation in different directions. But you can see the numbers are all 6+ days at Willard, regardless of the building. Alcott at similar numbers, and then Thoreau was, that I think is statistically significantly higher. So I don't know if that's helpful, but we did pull what we had and thought we wanted to share it with you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Ian, you want to go, Dawn?
Oh, just a quick clarity point, and I think I know the answer, Lori, but Thoreau was an at Reno, right? And Alcott and Willard are both new construction.
Yeah, I actually, I interestingly have the architect for Alcott and Thoreau right on the call, so Lorraine can probably
That's
answer
right.
better than I
I
can.
forgot about that.
So I would say that for all intended purposes, Thoreau is a new building. The only piece we kept was, well, it was 1980 at the time. And we built this in 2000. It was when we started the project study. So it really was 10,000 square feet of the whole building, and it was the kindergarten wing. So
which is the wing that just burnt. So
yep. So I don't, unless you know how many of those students are the kindergarten students,
yeah, no,
that doesn't help you.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah. All right, so that tells us something, but not a whole heck of a lot.
Well, it depends on your interpretation of the numbers. I think it does tell you something, but we may differently interpret it.
Ian, you want to go back to your slide? And Dawn, your hand is still up.
I just have a small point, and it's data that's different than what I would have expected based on my experience. And when I saw this number, I brought it up to Lori, but typically you do assume there will be less absenteeism with enhanced ventilation and a cleaner building, in a sense, a healthier building. So I was actually surprised that it wasn't substantially higher, meaning the absentee number, that the differential wasn't greater. So, it's just one data point. So again, it's open to interpretation, but I expected the absenteeism to go drastically down, and it doesn't appear that it did at Willard. But yeah, it's just interesting. It's different than what I expected, is all I'm trying to point out.
Dawn, is there data somewhere sort of in general about what happens when you do enhanced ventilation in a school and absenteeism?
I'd have to dig it up. I think I've made this point before. I've never actually done a 30% increase gives you an additional lead point. I've actually never done that on any of my projects. Personally, my personal projects.
Okay.
So I actually don't have pre and post occupancy data to support that, because I've actually never done it. I'd have to research to find out if there's case studies or information out there. But some of it's demographic, to be honest with you, but then some of it has to do with how old the building was and how inefficient or poorly it was operating to begin with. There's, I suspect Willard wasn't in disarray and it wasn't a terrible building to begin with. It certainly needed to be replaced and was. So there's a lot of different circumstances that would affect that. But I actually in the past have said that, there are, again, absenteeism, it could be random. People just go on vacation a lot around here. I don't know. We don't know. But often you suggest that a healthier building would decrease the absenteeism.
Can I make a comment, Pat?
Alexa had a hand up, and then you, Charlie. So Alexa?
Dawn kind of made my point. I just didn't know Lori, were we able to differentiate types of absences, like specifically? Yeah, okay.
No.
I just didn't know. Thanks.
Okay, Charlie?
Yeah, I think that there's really two aspects of this. One is health, the other is cognition. And I can just comment on what Lexington was able to determine. They did studies on this and decided on 800 as 800 ppm was the sweet spot on ppm for positive effect on cognition. As you go above 800, the cognition declines. People start getting drowsy at 1,000 and above. So we're right at the edge of that number. And I think if you read the literature, it's all based around, 1,000 is kind of the standard, but people do start getting drowsy potentially at that number. And at 1,100, it's worse and so forth until it gets to levels that are significantly above that and significantly worse. So that was the rationale, for example, for Lexington. It had a lot to do with cognition and effect on test scores and so forth. So that's the other variable here that we should pay attention to.
Heather?
Thanks. Some of these numbers are certainly compelling. I want to bring up two things to kind of clarify what we're talking about. One was that in the memo that Matt Root sent, that Don forwarded us all early this morning, he suggested some middle number. So I want to bring up that question again. In his memo, he suggested that if we couldn't, that 730 might be unrealistic, but that maybe we should look at 300. So I want to bring that up as a question and to understand other people's thoughts on that. And then the second thing I want to ask is really to Charlie. Charlie, you had said you don't want to increase the number to do this, but you want to move forward, and therefore that you thought we should find somewhere else to take the money from. So I wanted to understand what you meant by that and where you're suggesting we cut in order to add this.
Well, I don't have that second piece yet, but I think that's the principle that I would follow if we were to, somehow get enthusiastic about doing this.
Okay.
Well, I mean, there are certain things that are, I think, in the category of nice to have that are on that VE list. I think it's a matter of opinion. I'm not going to get into the specifics on those, but yeah, I mean, I think there are areas where some trade-offs could be made if someone thought this was something important to pursue and we wanted to keep it budget neutral.
Thank you, Charlie. Lauren, you've had your hand up before. Did you have a?
Well, I wanted to offer, so I was going to make the same comment as Dawn, but with respect to the many factors go into a new building, we do actually track our academic performances in the buildings before and after. And ventilation is not the only thing that factors into absenteeism or college rates. I mean, for example, Quincy High School, we had a 8% increase in the four-year graduation from the original building to the new building. We had 14% increase in college bound. We had 160% increase in students taking AP exams. So a new building in and of itself provides so much for students that it's not all about ventilation. And I just wanted to make that point that there are so many factors that go into it. So it's important that we don't forget that the features of the building, lighting, access to light and views, materials, low VOC, like so many other components actually affect the students' performance in the building. And I don't want us to potentially take out something that also has a positive impact. So as you're having this discussion about, as Charlie said, is there something else to take off to trade? It is a big picture. It is a big picture component that provides, advanced performance for our students in these new buildings. And we just should keep that in mind.
All right, then let me put out a recommendation or a thought. I was asked the question, and I'll just say it. We have a provision for a wood look ceiling that is 300 something thousand. So there are items on there that where we could substitute something else that would not affect those kinds of indicators that you just talked about, Lorraine. I know people have feelings about each of these items, but I think that potentially there are things that we could pick out that are you know, are not necessarily material to the educational program.
Let me try, without us going back to the VE list, and I would like, I guess maybe I want to make a proposal that we consider what Andy has said, that we can improve the ventilation from the basis of design through ductwork design or headers or whatever, but there are ways to improve it without going to the full $700,000 additional money in that line item. Can we not simply direct the designers to strive to achieve that? And maybe, Lorraine, that's not specific enough, but to achieve better ventilation beyond the 970, 19, and 3.
With the CFM per unit on the roof as currently in the SD. So that's the caveat, Pat. So in order to, you know, as Andy said, once we start changing the rooftop equipment, that's where the dollars come in. So I think that the directive to do everything we can to increase the CFM per person, working within the confines of the units as currently specified, is one thing, but I'm not sure that's getting to what Charlie wants.
So that's the DOAS units. So without the DOAS units, and then working to achieve the better measures of ventilation. As we discussed earlier, if the project needs more, if this aspect of the project needs more funding, it comes from the contingency. I guess you have to decide if you're going to do the 3 DOAS units or not do the 3 DOAS units. Is that yeah. So I guess my proposal is, can we come to a decision that we would not do the DOAS units, because Andy has said that we can improve the ventilation without increasing the number of units. And I'll stop talking. Alexa and then Court.
Sure. In terms of what Charlie was, I don't know if he was expressly advocating for this or not, but I do feel like we committed as a committee to an order of operations here, which was that we addressed all that we could on the VE log, knowing full well that these two were still, the soil and the ventilation were still in play. So personally, I would be uncomfortable revisiting and trying to essentially swap these kinds of things out, only because I'm trying to be as purist as I can be, knowing that that was sort of the process we all committed to. Just my sort of thought, but.
Thank you, Alexa. I appreciate that.
I'm not feeling qualified to talk about mechanicals and the equipment side of the house, Pat, but I am very much in favor of a 800 ppm with the health and cognition benefits that seem to be rather obvious to us. And I would hope that in order to achieve that, if we decide that's our intention, that we, yes, Pat, as you said, look at contingency, but also that we keep VM on the table so that SMMA could come back to us with trade-offs should they be required.
And that happens throughout the project, right?
So I'm not exactly sure what your question is, Pat. Does VE happen throughout the project? If we're not on budget, we would recommend VE, but if we're on budget, unless there was something, a materiality change or a savings we found because of doing something differently, that would come into play. But typically, if we're on budget, we don't recommend taking anything out of the project. That's the norm.
Dawn? Dawn? Yeah.
Yep. So thanks, Pat. I had 2 points I wanted to make. I agree with Alexa's point about process, but I also wanted to address Charlie's point about wood ceilings. I think it's more than just materiality. It's an overall feeling of the building. And if you're not familiar with the phrase biophilic design, go ahead and look it up. It's basically biophilia is a innate human instinct about connecting with nature and natural materials. And I think Heather's spoken quite eloquently in the past about this and the feeling of this overall school. But the definition of it says that it is found to support cognitive function, physical health, and psychological well-being. So it's along the same lines of improving ventilation. I just want to point out that it's not simply about just what the material is, but how it feels and the overall feeling of the building. So some of these things are important and aren't just, a way of spending money. It's about creating a feeling of the school and students connecting with nature. And I think we've done a really good job of doing that in this project. So I personally am not interested in revisiting that.
Thank you, Dawn. All right. No one's putting their hand up with any bright ideas moving forward with this. So if what we're left with is the decision to, let me ask you this, Lorraine, is there a middle number that gets us to 800 with some level of certainty?
No, the estimators priced this based on the 800, and this is the value that they determined.
And that's because the DOAS units that's what it would cost.
Because you have to change the CFM of the DOAS plus then all the downstream equipment to it. So I'm not going to offer another price. This is what they priced.
Okay. All right.
I mean, you're not going to offer an in-between price for less than the air handler that's somewhere in between.
So the question Pat asked me was to get to the 800, Charlie. I'm not comfortable offering another value to get to the 800 because this is the price the estimators provided to do that.
Yeah. Heather?
I guess I'm just wondering, maybe similar question in a different way or getting at something different. If we were to go back and look at Matt Root's memo again and his suggestion of maybe 300, I just want to understand where this would go. If we as a committee said, let's put another 300 into ventilation and ask our professionals to improve ventilation somehow above what we have now. Is there some idea? I know that there can't be any promises, but some rough idea of where we could end up with something like that? I'm just trying to understand options, really. I'm not even advocating for any direction because I'm undecided.
Andy, not being a mechanic, Ian, can you put up the chart, please, the ventilation chart? So Andy, not being a mechanical engineer, if we were to take half the value, does it mean we'd end up somewhere between 970 and 800 in the middle? Is it that simplistic?
From a by the numbers perspective, that's a fair enough place to start and to think about it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Just as a point of reference, we happen to be in construction on a project in Lincoln for their K-8 school. And so phase 1 is done and they're constructing phase 2 now. And so I've been monitoring the building management system, periodically just to kind of see how things are going. Out of curiosity, I just happened to notice that the CO2 levels in the classrooms, as I sort of scan them, I don't see anything over the 700s, and they have their system is essentially that top line item. It's Ashrae code ventilation. There is some inherent error in some of the CO2 sensors and the values they measure, but presuming they're relatively new and recently calibrated, I feel fairly comfortable with the numbers that I'm seeing.
And do they have extra DOAS unit?
They don't.
They don't.
No, their system is essentially the same as the one that's in the base design for this school, with the exception that they're, just because of the architecture of the school and the phase construction of it, there's no possibility for their DOAS units to be headered together and to be able to shift flow one way or the other.
On a positive note, we're four CFM per person above what Ashrae would probably suggest. Is that correct?
Yes. And it also, the base design considers no diversity. So for example, in a typical classroom portion, area where you have 3 or 4 classrooms around a hub space, those, when the classrooms are in full operation, the hub space is probably empty. And other portions of the classroom wing may not be, fully occupied. So there is some inherent diversity that we could take advantage of, that allows us to provide a little bit more flow into the occupied spaces versus those that are unoccupied. And that'll happen, that can happen naturally through just, the CO2 control sequence that we'll have in the project. I guess what I'm saying, through a lot of my comments is that I think there's ways to kind of move the project, closer to the 800 part per million. And in DD, as we go through that, we can continue to, run calculations that help us, determine where we are. And we can talk with you about, how we're doing toward that goal, and that's assuming that we don't add any budget to the project for this line item.
I don't, quite frankly, see a way, forward here without, adding to the budget bottom line. I'm unwilling to do that. I'm willing to accept some risk that, that we're not going to have perfect ventilation, but I think Andy has made a lot of positive comments about doing better than the 970 ppm, and perhaps we can proceed on the basis of what it is we have in front of us, without asking for more money at this time. I think that's really the question. Are we going to ask for more money to enhance things? I think Andy's already indicated a willingness to kind of work the process and make the adjustments. And Matt has talked about providing, advice as we move forward. I think, what else can we do? It seems that this is where we're at on this. And we're not going to most likely tap into anything else on that VE list, because that's difficult. So there you have it. We've had our discussion.
Thank you, Charlie. Court?
Yeah, just a little clarity, Charlie Parker, for you. Were that so, as you described it, would we provide any specificity around what we want to achieve, or is it a do our best? What am I hearing?
Well, what I'm hearing from Andy is, number one, that we can do better than 970 without adding any additional costs by making some modifications in some of the ducting. I'm happy with that, number one. Number two, Andy's also saying that we probably have some flexibility due to some of these common areas. I think that's what you're saying, Andy. And the fact that we may have less density than what is in these numbers here in terms of what we need to serve. So a little bit more flexibility, and the Lincoln example tends to suggest that we may be okay if these designs are similar. So that's kind of, that would be my comment in trying to read what I'm hearing from Andy and Lorraine.
So well, I'm hearing better than 970. I'm not hearing 800. And the conundrum as I see it is, were we to achieve what appears to be the current standard of 800 and maintain our current budget, it would have to come from elsewhere.
Well, one clarification, the current standard is probably 1100 if you want to use the Ashrae standard. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, Ashrae would say 1100, and Ashrae would say that we don't need all the CFM per person that we have in that top line, that we don't need 19. So we would be worse than well, I shouldn't say worse. Our numbers would be, the PPM would be higher if we proceeded with the standard. We're better than the standard by a small amount, but we're better than the standard. And we may have flexibility to get that number down. I think that's taking it on faith that, you know, we're going to get down somewhere around 700 when this system is implemented and the kids are in the rooms. I guess that's about all I can say is my understanding of what I'm hearing. Andy, correct me if I'm wrong. Am I getting this right?
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to offer avenues and perspective, avenues to kind of get, you know, closer. I can't say that we can get to an 800 calculated number. We'll work on trying to get as close as we can.
Yeah, I'm not asking you to do that. I know you can't do that, but I think you're saying that, you know, from a practical point of view, or looking at the Lincoln example, you know, that we have less to worry about here with this capacity, then perhaps we're reading into these numbers that are in front of us. So,
and I just
I'm more comfortable with the whole scenario here, I guess is what I'm saying.
Dawn and then Lorraine.
Yeah, I just had a couple points. One was similar to what Charlie was saying, which was this is a design calculation we're trying to get to, but what actually matters is the measurable amount that's within the spaces, which is what he's alluding to with the Lincoln example, that it's actually performing better than designed, if I'm just simplifying what you said, Andy. The other point I wanted to make was that if we were in fact trying to pursue the lead point, the 30% increase, I would personally support it above and beyond what we're trying to spend, but recognizing that money is critical to this design. And I don't see the definitive data that says that this will in fact, you know, have our students in the building more and sick less and perform better. There's just no definitive data that says that. And given the cost, I think if we're asking our consultant to do the best they can within our budget to get close to these numbers, recognizing that they can't actually get to the, say, 800 without increasing the equipment size, in my mind, is a good direction to go. And I appreciate that Andy is, you know, thinking creatively and trying to get us closer to where we want to be without necessarily spending the money that is being proposed. So thank you, Andy.
Lorraine.
So at the risk of saying something I know nothing about, you know, Andy has the DOS units currently designed at a CFM. One thing we've seen as we go through design is sometimes we're able to lower that. So I would offer, and Andy, tell me quickly if I'm out of line here, that we would hold the CFM that we are at in schematic design, even if as we move through DD, we see an opportunity to lower that, because that would only give more benefit, right?
Yeah, that's certainly a tactic. You know, you're probably in the 10% or less range, differences as we move forward. But yeah.
But that so the with the conversation of trying to improve, we've said without changing the CFM that's currently specified for the DOAS. but I would
Right.
also, what I'm saying is we would hold that as a given.
Right. So said another way, if there were budget pressures as we move forward and, and a need to VE, we might sharpen our pencil mechanically and say, okay, we're going to try to incorporate some level of diversity in our calculation, which would allow us to, reduce the DOAS unit sizes from 15,000 CFM each to say 13.5. And we could choose to, as Lorraine says, hold the line on that.
Okay, do we have we've had a lot of discussion. It's almost 10 o'clock. Do we have a motion on this item? Charlie, you seem to have you seem to be headed in that direction. Do you want to?
Oh, what would, you want me to make a motion?
Well, I want someone to make a motion. I'm asking.
Well, I move that we accept as the basis of design the recommended values that SMMA has provided at 19 CFM per person and 970 ppm as the calculated space CO2, and that we proceed on that basis. Is that good enough?
I think it should say, and therefore reject the added VE.
Yes, and therefore reject the added amount for the 25 CFM per person.
Just a question, Charlie, do you want to make note in your motion of our intent to continue to try to increase air quality without adjusting the price, or no? Just, it seems like that's where the discussion was. Do we want that?
Yeah, all right.
As part of the motion.
Yes, and that we will continue to look for ways to improve, ventilation without increasing cost.
Second.
I'll second that. Oh, Court did.
So for purposes of discussion, just remind me that puts us between Ashrae at 11 and current construction elsewhere that we've noted today at 8, correct? Thank you, Lorraine.
Okay, any discussion? Ian, you want to try to restate the motion as it's going to get entered in?
I think the motion would be to reject 6B as shown here.
When do we want to record the minutes? The motion is to reject 6B with the intent of achieving, I don't know how to say that.
May I offer it, Pat?
Yes, please do.
Sure. So the motion would be to reject 6B to increase the ventilation, but continue to pursue advancing more improved ventilation delivery for the project within the confines of the CFM at the rooftop units as currently designed. Is that okay?
It's okay with me.
Thank you, Charlie.
So are we ready to vote?
I'll second the motion.
I think Court already, or somebody already did.
I just think I finally heard a motion.
Oh.
But, I mean, we've heard 3, but I think this final one is the one we're going with, right?
Pursue advancing enhanced ventilation without changing DOAS sign and rejecting the cost. All right. So I have a motion, a second. No more discussion. Okay. Let's have a roll call vote. Stephen Crane.
You had to go.
You must have had to go. Jared?
Yes. Yes.
Matt Johnson?
Yes.
Roy Hunter?
Yes,
Justin Cameron?
I think he had to go too.
Okay. John Harris?
Yes.
Russ Hughes?
Oh, Justin's there, Pat. You should back up. Sorry.
Okay, Justin Cameron? Are you muted, Justin? I just need to hear a yes or no.
All right, go on. I don't know if he's got the volume up now.
Okay. Peter Fischella?
Yeah, it's busy this morning.
Alexa Anderson, I think she had to go.
She was trying to come back for the vote, so
Okay.
maybe try her at the end.
All right. Clerk Booth?
Yes.
Heather Bout?
Yes.
Frank Cannon? Still not here. Chris Popov?
Yes, and I have to chop off. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Charlie Parker?
Yes.
Matt Rude is not here. Pat Nelson, yes. Don Borelio?
Yes, and don't forget Rachel.
I won't. Amanda, you mean?
Amanda.
Amanda?
I'm sorry.
Yes. All right.
I'm sorry. I meant Amanda. Why did I put
Yeah.
Rachel?
So that's a
Oh my
unanimous
God.
approval.
Sorry, Amanda.
Yeah. Okay, so we now have, if I remember correctly, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, we have voted on all of the VE items, and we do not need to make any other votes at this point.
Maybe we do. The numbers that Ian put out showed a total number of 103.7 for the poll project. At some point, we want to clarify that we're really at 102.7 for the total project. I think.
Okay, so can we just get past the VE item? So we're just can we agree that we don't need to make any more adjustments to the VE items?
Yes, present time.
Okay. Point well taken, Court. There will be continued discussion throughout the project. I understand. Okay. So those are item 5. We're done. Item 6 on the agenda is scheduled class cash flow and budget update. And maybe, Charlie, this is where your point gets folded in. Ian, you have a report. Oh, Court, I'm sorry, you have your hand up.
Well, mine was similar, I guess, to yours, Charlie. I want, now that we've done today's work, I want a reaffirmation of the voted number. Thank you.
Okay, so that's
I think by necessity, we will have a future meeting where we will talk about the motion that we wish to make at town meeting. And I think at that point is when we would want to confirm the number that we want to include in our motion. And so I don't believe that we really need to confirm that formally today. We are all looking at this number, of course, and that's, I think, what we would expect to move. But we have time. This town meeting's not until January 20th.
I'll defer to you on that, Matt. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. All right, Ian, do you want to speak to scheduled cash flow and budget update?
Yes. So this is the same schedule. There's no changes here. You guys have seen this. I don't know if you have any questions on it. No change there.
Okay, I don't see any hands up, so.
So this is looking specifically the breakdown of the 103.7 million. So what I did here was just updated these values to reflect the 103.7, which was the vote that was carried on the 12th. So you're going to see, a variance between this and what is on the Excel sheet here, because so I'll go down through it essentially. So the construction value carries all your value management that you've accepted to date. Don, did you have something? No.
When you're done, Ian.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
I just
Sure.
wanted to get in the queue.
Sure. So the construction value carries all the value management that you've accepted to date. So there were no changes today. So this number still stands. The number 30, architectural and engineering, is based on updated values that we got from SMMA for budgeting purposes for their basic services from DD through construction administration, the upcoming geotech engineering work and geoenvironmental work, some money for site surveying, money for hazardous materials, oversight, and then specialty consultant as well. Other reimbursable costs for architecture, and then printing costs over the minimum printing, testing and inspection. I bumped that up to this value just based off of past project experience and what it's going to take to staff construction for testing and inspection. Number 40, admin costs. We have essentially the OPM services from design development through closeout of the project based on an updated work plan that we provided. Commissioning agent, I bumped that up a little bit to 280,000 based off of previous experience on projects. We're carrying 30,000 for advertising, 50 grand for other administrative costs, 200 grand for other project costs / moving costs. Utility fees remain the same. FF&E is based off of updated estimates that we received from specialty consultants. So these are those values carried here. And then you've got a subtotal. And then essentially all the VE that was accepted was pushed down into these contingency line items. So I maintained the 2.5% of the value that we had before, the 2,040,000 for bidding contingency. The owner's contingency remained the same, I believe, and then the construction contingency went up because you took it out of construction and put it into contingency. So that's the basis here of building out the 103.7. Happy to answer any questions. Oh, and the cash flow is essentially taking a look forward at what we think the cash flow is going to be for that 103.7 million. So starting February 2022, when we get into design development, just projecting out services and invoices for OPM and commissioning, design consultants, getting into FF&E and miscellaneous administration. And then you can see here, there's an uptick once we get into construction in June 2023. You start to see construction and contingency costs here for the cash flow. This is basically a 24-month period at the same value, and switch over to phase 2 here with some of these costs, and then close out towards the end here. And I was asked to break this down by fiscal year. The town's fiscal year is July through June. So that's what these are here. So you can see what the costs are, projected cash flow for each fiscal year, also totaling the 103.7.
Okay, so Dawn, you had your hand up first.
Thank you. 2 points I wanted to make. When Ian says he was asked, that Carrie LaFleur was from the town was asking for a cash flow breakdown. So Ian was kind enough to put that together as we start to prepare financials for the special town meeting. So just want to point out that that's where that ask came from and was sent back to her. I also want to point out the highlighted piece at the bottom, and you saw an email from Lori yesterday about this. We want to be really clear that the 1.5 that's already been allocated and currently finishing being spent on feasibility and SD is separate from this additional money, because we're not asking the town to borrow that money again. We've already done that and approved that at town meeting. So we just want to make that line really clear that the 1.5 was feasibility and SD. That's finishing up. That will close that chapter. And then the new chapter is what the remainder of the project will be. So just for clarity, there's been some documents that have been put out with the 1.5 in there, and it changes all the numbers and creates confusion. So just moving forward, we want to keep those numbers separate for clarity, because I don't want anyone just tuning in or catching, seeing one of our slides and seeing a number that's higher than what we're asking the town to borrow. We just want to be really clear so we don't go into special town meeting with different numbers out there. We just want to keep it really clean as far as what we're asking the town to borrow. So I just want to point that out. I know it's highlighted here. It was emailed about yesterday, and I just want to let everyone know that why we're doing it that way. No one's trying to say, hey, we didn't include the 1.5 in this project. It's just already been borrowed, and we want to differentiate the borrowing for clarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. Lorraine?
Yeah, I just want one point to Matt Johnson's point that there'll be a separate meeting. Some of the numbers that Ian is showing in the AE configuration, those were preliminary allowances, and I've since received all but one of the final estimates proposals from the specialty consultants. So I will work with Ian. There's some minor tweaks. I think it ends up being like a $7,000 difference. It's not a lot, but I want to get the categories accurate before you vote on the final budget. So I will do some shifting of those numbers around with Ian based on the final proposals. Thank you.
We asked a couple questions about these lines.
Charlie, Court and Matt had their hands up. So after they speak. Court?
Thank you. Two items, maybe Matt, put you on the spot, perhaps. But I think just for more transparency on the 1.5, we have an understanding that the town manager's office will expend that 1.5 in its entirety, and will be held harmless for any other work that was done in DD. It'll close it out completely. Matt, correct me if I'm wrong. Secondly, somebody may embarrass me here if I'm uninformed, but I see 103.7 here, but I think we have a 102.7, and the 103.7 was a understanding that in no way would our town meeting warrant exceed that, but that doesn't make it the number that is relevant to us. I thought it was 102.7. So where does the extra million come from that shows up here? I'm frankly confused.
The extra million, Ian, you can answer it, but the extra million right now is in the contingencies. And it was only because of the vote, right, Ian?
No, because the contingency is included in the 102.7.
Yeah, so I'm trying to show you the comparison here. This is what I was trying to speak to a little bit. Sorry. So this is a snapshot from the other page, which shows the differences. So all these numbers are the same, right? This is the differences. So you've got close to 900,000 here. Sorry, I switched the order of these. Another 100,000 in soft cost contingencies. So there's your $1 million, and your bidding contingency was a calculation. So it's slightly off as well.
So this was an independent decision to add money to the 102.7 to round it up to 103.7, and that's a unilateral decision on your part, Ian? Correct me if I'm wrong. What's going on here?
Yeah, so it's definitely not my decision in any way here. It's just a way of showing information. So we're happy to show it any way that you guys want to see it. I was showing it as 103.7 because that's what the vote was.
That was not a cost vote. That was a warrant do not exceed vote. They're completely different, Ian. Correct me if I'm wrong, committee.
Right.
Dawn, do you want to, Matt? No, Dawn, I guess Matt was first and then Dawn.
Matt's next.
Matt?
Yeah, so I mean, my comments were going to be along the same lines that, we just went through a many week process of VE to reduce the scope of the project. And so now we have a smaller project scope, and that should yield a smaller total budget that takes into account prudent contingencies. Now, I had understood up until now that 5% was a prudent construction contingency, and then added this bidding contingency of 2.5%, just given the uncertainty of market conditions. Now I'm seeing that contingency further increased to what it looks like 6% for construction or more. And that to me reflects that somehow we now have less certainty about this construction than we did just last week. So I don't really understand why our VE is being rolled into contingency as opposed to being rolled into a smaller total budget amount. And unless I see some justification for increasing contingency, I don't see why we would ever do that.
Yeah, again, this is just a way of reporting information. I'm happy to change this. This is building out a $103.7 million budget. I'm happy to change it to what you're seeing here on the Excel sheet. If that's how you guys want to see it, that's.
I would advocate for our data showing what we actually did.
Now, I did hear another set of things, though, that Ian, that you reviewed in the course of your discussion there, and that was adjustments to those overhead amounts. And I guess that's just based upon further refinements, and those should be reflected, I guess with Lorraine's additions, in the total budget if you now have better information. But otherwise, I would see that 102,716 numbers being the number. So I can imagine that some of those other adjustments that you were discussing might affect that number a bit, but probably not by a lot.
Yeah, I think at this point, it's just the modifications to the A&E.
Right, those soft costs. And what were the net effect of those soft cost estimate changes?
I think it's like $7,000.
Okay.
I did.
So we're still more or less looking at
plug in the
1027 number, I think. That's my assertion.
Yeah.
Don?
I'm of the same mind. There's no reason we need more contingency. We're already at a substantial amount. Just was going to make a lot of the points that Matt did, so I won't do it again, but agree that this needs to reflect all of the reductions that were agreed upon and voted upon in the VE log to reflect our new bottom line, which would include the 7,000 increase, I think is what Lorraine said on her actual sub-consultant amounts.
Okay, Heather, and then John Harris.
Yeah, thanks. Really quickly. I agree. And I don't think it's really a debate. I think we all had agreed that after we voted the 103.7, we would then agree on what number we might revise that to and bring to the meeting. So my question is just about process. I think Ian was bringing us what we have so far because we haven't voted to lower that number or bring a different one. So at some point in a future meeting, do we then take another vote to say, okay, it was a not to exceed 103.7, And now our final number is 102.716 or whatever it is, because Lorraine said there might be a little more work to go into that. So at a future meeting, do we take the 1027-ish number and say, I move that we, agree to revise the warrant number on the floor of town meeting to 1027, et cetera, et cetera. Is that the process? Okay.
That is my understanding of what we need to do.
Okay, great. That's good. I think we're all lined up then.
Yeah, and that's why I didn't show it that way, because that hadn't been done yet. That's
right. That makes sense. Makes
Yeah.
perfect sense.
John Harris?
I just wanted to follow up on what Court was mentioning. We're in the process and close to executing contract amendments as Court specified. And we will provide information to the chairs on this.
Okay, thank you. All right, so this will be on the agenda for our next meeting. And by that time, we may have some more information, and then we can come up with a final number that we will take to town meeting with us. All in agreement? Great. Is there any, oh, John, your hand is still up. John Harris.
Sorry, no, I'll take it down.
Okay, thank you. New business? Seeing none, I'll move to public comments. Are there any public comments? Carlin Reed and then Christine Reynolds.
Hi, this is Carlin Reed, 83 Wits End. I've been monitoring the soil removal process at Warner's Pond. This goes back to your soil discussion. I'm looking at the costs for moving the 32,000 cubic yards of soil from Warner's Pond to the back of the prison farm, and that's going to cost over $200,000. I don't know if you have that cost information, but that's available on the NRC's website. Thanks, that's it.
Thank you, Carlin. Christine?
Hi, Chris Reynolds, 15 Captain Miles Lane, so Chair of the FinCom. Thank you very much for your work today. And just a reminder, so in your discussion about when you need to vote, you have a hearing on 12/16. So my view is you want to go to that hearing with a number. I don't think you have until the vote to make a decision on your number. I think you've got to come to the public with a number on 12/16. Just my opinion.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Okay. Any other public comments? Seeing none, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Before you do,
Sorry.
just for the record, next meeting.
Oh, right. When is our next meeting?
I literally just raised my hand to ask that, Court. So thank you. I will take it down.
And
I don't see one in my calendar yet.
And
I
given
don't-
Yeah, I don't think we have one.
Given Chris's comments, it should be prior to 12/16.
That's
No
2
reason
weeks
to
from
believe
today.
that's incorrect, what she said.
All right, so we can have our next meeting be on the 9th or the 16th. The hearing is in the evening. We can.
16th cuts it close.
Should we go for the 9th? Is that going to work for folks?
And is there anything else on that agenda, or are we just voting a new number?
We don't know.
I don't know, Heather. I don't have an answer. I mean, right now,
Okay.
I think that would be it.
Currently, the only thing we have left to do before.
Yeah.
special town meeting.
And Lorraine, you had mentioned doing some more work before we finalize the number. Does that give you enough time for us to do that on the 9th? That's a week.
So
away.
that's for us. So our team just wants to wrap up schematic design. I mean, we need to take the VM log. It needs to be incorporated into the SD set. A little bit of narrative about it. Some of this, particularly, I think we'd want some narrative on the soils and the ventilation written in. So we just want to incorporate that and then finalize the set. But there's no vote needed for it.
Okay.
You've already approved the schematic design.
Right. Okay. Got it. So the 9th is fine for you guys.
So the 9th. That's fine for me.
So then 9th at 7:30 a.m.
30 a.m. Now, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you, Court. Second?
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, Stephen Crane? Gone, okay. Jen, gone. Matt Johnson?
Aye.
Lori's gone. Justin Cameron? John Harris?
Yes.
Russ Hughes? Peter, Alexa, gone. Court Booth?
Yes.
Heather Bout?
Yes.
Chris Popov? Okay, Charlie Parker?
Yes.
Pat Nelson, yes. Don Grelio?
Yes.
Amanda Cohn.
Amanda Cohn?
Yes.
Great. All right, everybody, we'll see you on December 9th.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
I just missed it, huh?
Matt,
Man.
we'll tell you about it after.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.